Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time, Masechet Bava Metzia. Today we are going to be learning Daf 29 through 35. This is our fifth class in Bava Metzia, and we are going to begin on Daf 29. So 29, the Daf tells us, if you remember, last time we were talking about finding a lost item and how long you have to watch them for, or what do you have to do when you find this lost item. So on Daf 29, it tells us that if you sell the lost item, again, let's say you're dealing with an animal, you don't know what its lifespan is, so sometimes it's better just to sell the animal and then to keep the money. Or maybe after you sell the animal, you actually have the right to use the money. And then if the money gets lost, you need to replace it. And if you don't have the right to use the money, then if it gets lost, then you're not responsible because, again, you sold the animal, you did what you needed to do. Okay. The Gemara tells us that the finder can't use the object that he found. But you're seen as someone who is guarding it, but will be paid or compensated for that guarding. And therefore, right, what kind of compensation will you get? Not that you're going to be paid for finding the item, but when you're in the process of returning a lost item, you're in the process of doing a mitzvah, and we know that a person who's in the process of doing a mitzvah is exempt from doing another mitzvah, right? The way it's phrased in Hebrew is ha'osek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah, right? So if you're in the middle of doing one mitzvah, you don't have to stop to do a different mitzvah. Of course, there are different cases, but here, because you're responsible for this item, you do not have to stop to do, you don't have to do another mitzvah at that exact time. Okay, if it was stolen, if this item was stolen by an armed robber, then again, you are not responsible for it. You can, and then we said that you can only use the money from the sale of the found item. But if you find money, so then you can't use it. Again, if you think you can return that money, you cannot use it. If you're watching someone's money as opposed to an item or an object, you are not allowed to use that money. Okay, the Mishnah tells us, let's say you found a holy scroll. Again, this could mean a Torah scroll, but it could also mean any other holy book. Again, in those days, books were written by a scribe and then generally rolled up. So if you find this holy scroll, so how do you make sure that you maintain it? You have to open it up every 30 days and read from it, right? Make sure that the letters are all good. That's the way to make sure that you're maintaining this scroll. You cannot learn something new from this scroll. Again, we're nervous that you're gonna, maybe smudge a letter. You cannot read it with another person. If you've ever read a scroll with another person, right? Maybe one person will pull it towards them and you'll pull it towards you and you'll rip it. So you have to be very careful. If you find a garment and you are going to return it, so you need to spread it out every 30 days, I guess, right, to air it out. Don't keep it, folded up or rolled up in your closet or in your drawer. You have to air it out every 30 days. If you find a silver or a copper utensil, you should use it because it's good for the utensil. If it's glass or gold, so don't touch it. The Mishnah actually says you should bury it, leave it alone because it's very precious and it might break. so better not to touch it. Okay, and if you find something that's below your status to retrieve, you do not need to retrieve it. And we'll talk about this in the Gemara. So the Gemara explains, let's say you find tefillin. So you should actually sell them right away and put the money aside, because tefillin are things that you can always buy, which is interesting that in the time of the Gemara it was very easy to buy tefillin, and therefore the Gemara is assuming that the person would rather get new ones, so therefore you should sell it. But again, if you find a Torah scroll or a holy book, holy scroll, that's very hard to buy, and therefore you should not sell it. But as we said, you open it and you read it every month. Okay. And then the Gemara talks about a Sefer Torah, that if you have a Torah scroll, you have to roll it every 12 months. If it's a new Torah scroll, then every 30 days. So we see that there is this idea of opening and rolling it so that it stays in good condition. You are not allowed to lend anything that you borrowed. Right? You might think that you can lend a Torah scroll because it's a mitzvah for other people to read from it. The answer is no. You're not allowed, if you borrow something, you're not allowed to then lend it out to someone else without permission. Okay, right, again, you're supposed to open it. Don't open it more than 3 columns. Again, we're concerned that maybe it'll rip. And we spoke about the garment. It's good to shake out the garment, but again, only one person at a time. If it's 2 people, don't do it. Again, we're scared that it's going to rip. From here, the Gemara gives some practical advice from Rabbi Yochanan, drinking warm water. If you inherit money, don't spend it on expensive things, and things like that. Okay, Daf 30, we're talking about spreading out this garment. You should only do it for the good of the garment, not for your benefit, right? So don't spread it out when your friend comes so that you can show them this beautiful garment that you find. It's not good either because of Ain Hara, right? They're going to want to maybe take it, steal it, borrow it, or either because of Ain Hara, where they're going to say like, oh, I can't believe they have such fancy things, or they actually might come and steal it, which is not good, and therefore don't take it out when you have guests over. Okay, from here, the Gemara talks about other items, since we were talking about items that you need to watch, but you have to be careful. The Gemara goes to 2, maybe we can call it tangential topics. One is about the egla arufa. If you remember, we learned about this. If they found a dead body and they're unsure which town the body came from, you measure where the closest town is, and that town has to do a ceremony where they behead basically this young calf, but the calf, what's special about this calf is that it was never worked. So here the Gemara talks about if you're making it work for you, that's called working, and therefore it's not okay. But if it's doing something for itself, then that's not called working, and therefore it's okay. The connection is the garment, as we said. You can take out the garment for itself, but not for your benefit. The same thing with the para aduma. If you remember, right, the red heifer, which was burnt, and the ashes were there to purify anybody who became impure from being in contact with a dead body. The same thing here, the para aduma, which literally means the red cow, the red heifer. The para aduma is also not allowed to have been worked, but let's say a bird landed on its back, That's not called working, so that would be okay. But if it was mated with another animal, that would not be okay because the other animal would be on top of it, and that would not be okay. All right. The verse that talks about returning a lost object says you cannot hide from it. But the word vihit alamta, to hide, is superfluous. And therefore, the Gemara teaches us that sometimes you are allowed to hide from it, meaning you don't always have to return the lost object. What's the case? Let's say the person is a Kohen, a priest, and the item is in a cemetery. We know that a Kohen, a priest, is not allowed to become impure. Therefore, he does not need to become impure to retrieve this lost item. Or if it's a very great rabbi and it would be below his dignity, right? Let's say there's a ball under a car. The great rabbi does not have to crawl under the car to get somebody's ball. So in those cases, you are allowed to not retrieve the lost item. Okay. All right. Another thing that's important to recognize is that your property comes before someone else's property. And we'll see this a little bit later on. There's a whole Mishnah about this. But let's say if you're going to lose money by getting this other person's property, you do not have to go and get it. However, if you begin the process of hashavat aveda, of returning this lost item, so then you have to complete it. Once you start, you need to follow through, and you need to complete your mission. Okay. Right. If you would return your item, you would need it. Right. If you want your item to be returned, you want to return other people's items. The Gemara talks about the concept of going beyond the letter of the law. This is called lifnim mishurat hadin, which means going above and beyond, right? Meaning there's the letter of the law, and then there's going above and beyond. So the Gemara teaches that we should always strive to go above and beyond, even when we don't have to, right? When it's not the letter of the law, we should try to do what is best for the people around us. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us, how do you know something is lost? So let's say you see a donkey that's grazing in the field. That donkey is not lost, right? Donkeys graze in the field. But let's say its gear is overturned or it's running through the field. That's generally a sign that it's lost, that it needs help, and you should help it. If you returned, let's say, the donkey, and then it ran away again, and then you return it again and it runs away again, you still need to return the donkey. Meaning, and we'll see the fact that it uses double language means you have to return it even if you've already returned it once before. You cannot tell the owner to pay back any of your expenses, but the owner can pay you, let's say, for a worker, like a maybe we would call it minimum wage, or we'll see exactly how we figure this out. You could be compensated for certain aspects of this mitzvah. The finder can make a condition with the court that he will deal with this item only if he gets reimbursed. That would be okay if the court says it's okay. So then the owner has to reimburse the person who found the item. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain all of the things that we just mentioned. Again, as we said, if it's obvious that the item is not lost, do not touch it. right? If you see something tucked behind a bush, if you see something that looks like someone placed it there on purpose, leave it, because the person's going to come back and look for their item, right? If it's lost, so then you should return it. Maybe it's about days, right? Maybe if it's up to 3 days, right? You see something placed on the side of the road, maybe you can wait up to 3 days, and then if not, then it's probably lost, and then you can return it, right? Let's say the animal is grazing and it's grazing for 3 days in a row. Again, maybe that's strange, maybe it's not. Maybe it's strange if you see it like out late at night or early in the morning. Again, any strange behavior we would assume the animal is lost. Any normal behavior, you should not assume that. Daf 31. If you find a cloak, a talit, next to a fence in public, we would assume it's not lost. But if it's there for 3 days, we assume that it's lost. Let's say you see water running towards your friend's property, right? There's some sort of water line break or something, and you see that water's coming towards your friend's property. You need to try and stop it from destroying your friend's property. This is an aspect of hashavat aveda, of returning a lost item, because in 2 minutes, their property is going to be lost. So if you can stop the water somehow, you should try to stop it. Build a fence, pile up bags and things like that. If, let's say, you see an animal running along the road or in the vineyard, so then we assume that it's lost. If it's grazing, again, anywhere, we assume it's not lost. Again, animals graze. But if it's running towards the city, again, I would assume it's not lost, because we assume that it's running straight home. Maybe the lost item is in the vineyard, and it's sorry. The Gemara says, well, wait a minute, maybe what's being lost is the vineyard, right? If an animal is running through a vineyard and ruining the vineyard, so maybe it's the vineyard that is lost, right? Meaning you're trying to save the vineyard. So the Gemara, as we said, because it uses the double language, hashev, tashivem, right? You should return it, or you should return the lost object, but it uses a word in a double language. As we said, you need to return the item even if it's multiple times, and you can return it to the owner without them knowing, as long as you put it in a safe area, right? So if you put it in their gated yard, as long as it's locked, or the gate is locked or it's closed and it's safe, so then you can even return it without them knowing. From here, the Gemara is going to look at different words in the Torah. When the Torah gave a directive to us, where there's a mitzvah, something to do, and it uses double language like we had before, hashev, tashivim. So we have also a similar language, double language, with the mitzvah of shiluach haken, when you have to send away the mother bird if you want to take the chicks. It says shaleach tishalach, right? Again, send away, right? Double. Again, the point is that if the mother comes back, you have to keep sending her away if you're still taking the children, the babies. Hocheach tochiach, when you rebuke your friends, when you're giving them constructive criticism. Again, this is a very touchy subject. You have to do it very sensitively. I don't think that's a word, with great sensitivity. But hocheach tochiach, right? You have to, even if they do something over and over, you should correct them over and over. From here, we go to the mitzvah of helping your friend's animal that is carrying a heavy burden. And let's say the animal falls down, you have to help the animal up, and maybe put the burden back on it. This is called prika. Prika means taking off a burden. and ti'ina, putting the burden on the animal. So you have to load and unload your friend's animal. And again, it has double language, hakem, takim. So we see this idea of helping the animal. Here we talk about the concept of tsar ba'alei chayim. When an animal is suffering, we want to reduce the suffering of an animal. Therefore, there's a mitzvah to help this animal who is carrying this heavy burden. And there are other examples, giving tzedakah, potech, tiftach, right? Open up your hand, again, written twice. The importance of giving tzedakah, or the importance of giving gifts when a slave leaves, also double language. Okay, daf 32, we have the next Mishnah tells us that if you find an animal in a barn, so that's where animals live, so you should leave it, it's not lost. But if you find an animal in a public street, in Reshut HaRabim, in the public street, you should return it. If the item is in a cemetery, as we said, the Kohen does not need to retrieve it. If a father tells him to go and get it, again, when we're still talking about the Kohen, if the Kohen's father says, son, go get it, he does not have to listen to his father. Now, we know that the father, that there's a mitzvah of listening to your parents, but here he is telling him to transgress and become impure, so he does not have to listen to his father. If the father tells him to not return an object, this is different, right? So again, you do not need to listen to the parent. As we said, you need to unload and reload an animal that is burdened, even if it's 4 or 5 times. That's the double language, as we said. If the owner is just sitting there, you are not obligated to do it, because the point is you're supposed to help the owner. If he's just sitting there, you do not have an obligation to help him. However, if the owner is old or sick, you do need to help him. Okay, and there's a machloket if the mitzvah is only to unload the animal or even to load him up as well, right after you help him stand up, do you have to load him up again? Okay, the Gemara explains when we said that you see an animal in a barn, it means that it's something that's unlocked, and it's within the city limits. But if it's outside the city limits, we might assume that it's lost, or maybe not even then. As we said, parents and children both need to follow the commandments of the Torah, right? That's why it says, Ani Hashem, I am your God, after the mitzvah of Kibud Avim. And therefore, if your parent tells you to transgress a mitzvah, you do not need to listen to them. Okay, we said that we're talking about unloading and loading an animal. You have to unload the animal for free, but it's a machloket if you can get paid for loading the animal. This is, of course, as we mentioned before, because of the suffering of the animal and because of financial loss. The verse teaches that the animal and the burden are on the floor, right? The animal maybe fell over, so you need to help the animal up and then to reload the animal. Or maybe if the burden is on it, right? Let's say the animal just fell over, you just kind of have to lift them up. And this shows that preventing animals from suffering is a biblical mitzvah, a mitzvah deoraita, that animals are not allowed to suffer. And if you see them suffering, you need to help them. However, if the owner overburdens the animal, so then the bystander does not have to help them, because that the owner is at fault here, or no, you still have to unload him either way. Again, we are concerned because of the suffering of the animal. If the owner isn't helping, we said that you're exempt from unloading for free, but you could ask for a wage. But again, you still need to help unload the animal because the animal is suffering. You also need to help the animal of an idolater. Again, because it's not about who owns the animal, it's about the animal itself. We do not want the animal to suffer, and therefore you should help him no matter what. Or maybe it's not a proof that it is biblical. It could still be rabbinic, but we want to prevent enmity, right, or hatred between non-Jews and Jews, and that's why maybe you should help them. Maybe the donkey driver. So here the question is, maybe the owner of the animal is Jewish, but the person leading the animal isn't, or vice versa. And the Gemara says, no, generally, if the owner of the animal is Jewish, so then the one driving the animal is generally also Jewish. If your friend's donkey needs to be unloaded and your enemy's donkey needs to be loaded, you need to help the enemy's animal before you help your friend's animal. And the Gemara tells us very clearly, this is so that we work on our evil inclination, on our Yetzer Hara, right? There's a part of us that's going to say, no, you should help your friends before you help your, the person you're in a fight with. And the Gemara says, no, you help your enemy first, and then you help your friend. Daf 33 again suggests maybe that preventing suffering of an animal is only rabbinic. Therefore, if the animal was overloaded by the owner, you do not have to help them. And the Gemara explains, when do you have to do this? Only when you see the animal up close, meaning when you're near the animal, right? But let's say it's very far away. You don't have to go completely off course to go help this animal. But you do need to walk with the animal a little bit to make sure that the burden doesn't fall off again. But for that action, you can ask to be compensated. Okay, next Mishnah. If you and your father or your parent lost an object, your object takes precedence, right? As I mentioned, I told you we would see this here. So the Mishnah explains almost like, it's different than the mask on the airplane. But here we're talking about your property versus your parents' property. You can save your property first. Obviously, if you can do both, you should do both. Here we're talking about where you can only do one. You can save your friend's property. You can save your own property before your parents. Let's say it's your property or your teacher's property, your Rebbe, your rabbi's property. Again, yours comes first. Let's say it's your parents' property versus your rabbi's property. Which one goes first, parent or teacher? So the Gemara tells us that the teacher comes first, right? The Gemara says your parent brought you into this world, but your teacher is bringing you into the next world. So I think it's very interesting. Again, as someone said, I taught this when I taught this daf. Someone mentioned, yes, well, it's the rabbis who are writing this text, which is an interesting point. But obviously the rabbis are also probably parents. But I think what the Gemara here is trying to teach us is respect and reverence for our teachers. I think that maybe a long time ago this existed. I think nowadays probably a little bit less. And I think that the Gemara is telling us that we have to make sure that we respect and show our teachers proper respect, kavod, difference. I think it's a very important message. And of course, the Gemara, the Mishnah continues that if your parent is a wise person, right, then they go before your teacher. So again, it's interesting in terms of what takes precedence. You have to help your teacher with a burden, and then your parents with a burden, right? If they're carrying something heavy, you have to help them. And if they were taken prisoner, you have to redeem the teacher and then redeem the parent. Again, if the parent is very wise, so then you redeem the parent first. Okay, so the Gemara explains, how do we know that our property comes first? Because the Torah says, Becha, in you, right? Basically, you come first in terms of losing property. However, says the Gemara, that if you're only involved in your own needs, you're going to end up being poor. Meaning, and a little bit of what we said before, right? If you are only, right, the Gemara says, right, im ein ani li mili, right, if I'm only for myself, right, then who am I? Aval kisha ani la'atzmi ma ani, right? If I'm only for myself, obviously you have to stick up for yourself, but if you're only for yourself, that's also not good. So we have to find a balance, as we talked before, about going above the letter of the law. Okay. From here, the Gemara talks about what does it mean, your teacher? Is it your teacher who taught you Torah, right, from the Torah or the Tanakh? Is it your teacher who taught you Mishnah or Gemara? Is it the teacher that taught you the most wisdom, right? So how do you define? Right here, generally they say it's the person who taught you the most, right? Basically, your primary teacher. That would be the teacher that gets preferential treatment. The Gemara talks about getting reward for learning Gemara, but you should also constantly be learning Mishnah. Here, the Gemara has the phrase "ratz." Ratz le Mishnah. You should be running towards your Mishnah, which I'll just give a shout out to Rav Rimon from my community in Alon Shvut, started an organization called Ratzim le Mishnah, which teaches children about Mishnah. You can Google it. It's an amazing program. But I think it comes from here, right? Meaning Mishnah is the foundation of Gemara. And if you forget your Mishnah, it's going to be a big problem. So you should always be reviewing your Mishnah. Another thing on Daf 33, the Gemara gives talks about people who are very committed to their Torah learning and observance, and they're called charedim, which is literally the modern Hebrew word for the ultra-Orthodox, charedim, or charedim, but it comes from here, from this Gemara, which talks about chared means to tremble. These are people who tremble before God. They're very careful to adhere to God's words. And the Gemara ends, we're finishing the second chapter. The Gemara ends with different groups of people who are learning different things. Sometimes there's some tension between those groups, but in the end of days, everybody is going to be unified. So I think that the Gemara is trying to, the chapter ends with this idea of Jews rejoicing because they are unified. And I think that is a very important message, especially nowadays when we don't necessarily feel unity. So I think that is a very important point. Okay, we are now going to begin the third chapter of Bava Metzia. This is another very famous chapter called Hamafkid. This is going to be talking about the 4 guardians or watchmen, people who are watching your collateral, your property. We are going to be talking about these 4 guardians, shomrim. I'm going to use the word shomrim from now on. So the 4 shomrim, there's the person who is watching it for free, shomer chinam. Chinam means free, right? This is when you say to your friends, hey, can you just watch this for me for like a day or two? I'm going out of town. Right, you're not paying them, you're just asking them to do a favor. That's called shomer chinam. There's shomer sachar. I'm going to pay you to right? Water my lawn while I'm away, right? Or watch my dog. If you're getting paid, you're called a shomer sachar. There's a socher, there's a renter, right? When I rent something from you, and there's a shoel, a borrower. Right, I borrow something from you. So these are the four shomrim. We're going to learn that each one of these shomrim has a certain level of responsibility, and then at a certain point, right, they're responsible up to a certain point, but at a certain point it ends, and then they're not liable for other things. Again, the more money you're making, the more responsibility you have. If I'm a shomer chinam, I'm just doing you a favor, so then I don't have to go above and beyond. And the Gemara is going to go through all the different responsibilities. So that's number one. Number two is, and we did mention this previously, but we'll mention it here because this is the source, that the shomer, let's say the owner comes back and says, okay, give me my dog. And you're like, I'm so sorry, but it just died. I fed it and I woke up in the morning and it died. Now, again, depending on what you say, at a certain point, you can take an oath that releases you from responsibility of having to compensate the owner. And then that's it. You don't have to compensate the owner. If you do not take that oath, you do need to compensate the owner. Okay. So here's our Mishnah. Again, we did it, I think, in the first chapter when we think that maybe you stole the item, which is why we're going to say that you have to take an oath. Okay, so let's get to the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us that if someone was watching someone else's animal or object and it was lost or stolen, and then the person who was watching it says, you know what, I don't want to take an oath. I'll just, here's $100. I'm really sorry, and I'm going to pay you for the item. Let's say we find the thief. Again, he's not the thief. This person is honest. We find the thief. Remember, we said a thief pays double or sometimes 4 or 5 times the value of the animal. That fee goes to the shomer, because remember, the shomer paid the owner for the item. So now he gets the rights to the double or 4 or 5 payment. However, if he swore and said, look, it's not my fault, and he swore and he didn't pay anything, so then the original owner gets the double or the 4 or 5 times. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain this. So the Mishnah teaches that it's an object or an animal, that either way you can get the rights to the double of the thief, because again, you might think, oh, maybe for an animal you should get it because you have to feed it, but if I'm just watching your, lawnmower, it's not going anywhere. So maybe I don't get the rights to the kefel, to the double payment, but we say, yes, either way you get the rights. When the person deposits the collateral or the item, right, he says, basically, you get the rights of the penalty if it gets stolen, right? And that's how you get those rights. Daf 34 tells us that the owner reserves the rights to the shearing and the offspring of this animal, because again, these are things that are internally generated, but external profits, the shomer gets to keep. And even if he didn't pay the owner yet, but he says, I'm going to pay you for the stolen item, he gets the right for the kefel, for the double payment. Okay. Each shomer can either claim that it was stolen or that it died when it was working. But if he decides to pay, so again, he gets the rights to the double payment. The borrower needs to pay, and in this case, again, if this is a shomer that, let's say it's of someone who borrowed the animal, so then he actually needs to pay for the animal before he can get the rights to the double payment. If he says that he's going to pay, and then he changes his mind, so then what's the halacha? And now we're going to have a long series of questions. You know, when the Gemara asks a lot of questions, we know that the answer at the end is going to be teku. Teku means we have to wait till Eliyahu Navi comes to answer these questions. So don't get too attached to the questions because there's no answer. But okay, so the first question was, what if he changes his mind and doesn't pay him? What if he says that he's going to pay him and then he dies and then the children say, no, never mind, I don't want to pay? Let's say if the children pay, let's say the children decide that they're going to pay. Or maybe the shomer pays the children, right? Basically, we have different levels of parents and children. Who has the right to say that this is okay? And again, right, let's say two people were watching the item, but only one of them paid. Again, as I mentioned, the Gemara ends with teku. Next, let's say the court makes the shomer take an oath that he doesn't have the deposit in his possession. Again, maybe we're concerned that he's going to keep it. So the court can make the shomer take the oath. Let's say a person lends money with the collateral, right? So again, a person lends $100 and you give them your watch, right, as collateral. And then the person loses the collateral. So what happens, right? So the lender says, wait, I lent you. So here are a few terms. We have the word sela. Sela is a certain amount of money. It's 2 shekel. Okay. So let's say the person says, the lender says, I lent you a sela and you gave me collateral that was only worth a shekel, which is half of what I lent you. So therefore, okay, I lost that half, but you owe me the other half, right? Because you still owe me money, right? And then the borrower says, what are you talking about? You lent me a sela and I gave you collateral that was worth a sela. So I don't owe you anything, right? And here, if that is the case, the borrower does not have to take an oath because he says, I don't owe you anything. Let's say the borrower says, you lent me a sela and the collateral was 3 dinar. 3 dinar is, again, 3 dinar, 4 dinarim make a sela. So he says, basically the collateral was worth 3/4 of the loan, right? So I only owe you 1, right? So now if the borrower says, I don't owe you 4, I owe you only 1. So now this is called, in Hebrew, the word is modeh b'miktzat, where you're admitting to part of the claim. As soon as the person admits to part of a claim, you need to take an oath that you do not owe the rest of the claim. So that is this case. Let's say the borrower says, wait a minute, right? The lender says, I owed you, I lent you money. It was a sela. And now the borrower says, wait, the collateral was worth 2 sela. You owe me money, says the borrower. Right? And the lender says, what are you talking about? It was only worth 1 sela, right? So he says, I don't owe you anything. So there's no oath. Let's say the borrower says, again, it's worth 2, you owe me 1. And the lender says, no, it was worth like 1.5. So then again, the lender now has to swear that he only owes a little bit. When the lender says that it was a sela and the borrower says it was 3 dinarim, that means like 3/4. So really the borrower should swear, but the rabbi said that it should be the lender who should swear, and then he can collect the shekel, the 1 dinar from the borrower. Okay, daf 35. If there are witnesses that an item was stolen, so then the lender can swear to the value of the item. And this will make him want to try to find the thief, or no, both have to swear. The borrower has to swear that it was taken, and the other one has to swear to the value of the item. Right? The lender, let's say the lender doesn't trust the borrower to say how much it was worth. So again, either you bring witnesses or you swear to the value. If the shomer voluntarily paid for the item, as we said, he gets the right to the kefel, to the double payment of the thief. But if he got the court involved, right, and then there was a whole court case, so then he doesn't get the rights. Okay, let's say property was seized by the court, property that was seized by the court is returned when the debtor offers to pay for the item, right? So again, there was property that was taken as payment, but when the borrower says, you know what, I have cash, I'll give you cash, give me back my land. So you have to take the cash and return the land. So either up to 12 months, this is the case, or even forever, it's the case. Let's say there's a secondary creditor, right? So again, they seize the land because the person didn't pay back the loan, and then it's seized again, or it's given to somebody else. He also needs to return the property if the person pays him money. But if the first creditor stole the land or gave it away as a gift, so then they can keep the land and they don't need to accept the cash. If the land was seized for a woman, right, again, for a loan that she was owed, and then she got married, and then she died, the husband is allowed to, sorry, one second. Yeah, right, so then the husband can keep it, and he doesn't need to accept cash for it, because he's seen as the wife's purchaser, right? Someone who bought it from the wife. And if the borrower gives the creditor land instead of paying back the loan, but didn't get the court involved, so it's a machloket that if he comes and gives money afterwards, do they need to accept it or not? Okay, last Mishnah for today. If a person rents a cow, and then lends it out to someone else, which, as we said, really, well, okay, you really shouldn't do, right? But let's say you did it. So you rented a cow, then you lent it to somebody else, and then it died because of natural causes. Now, the renter swears to the owner that it's not his fault. And then the borrower, because if we'll learn later on that if a renter rents an animal for work and then the animal dies, he does not have to compensate the owner because it died of natural causes. However, the borrower is liable to pay for death by natural causes. So the borrower needs to pay the renter for the animal that died, which is crazy because the renter is not the original owner. So the renter ends up making money, and the owner loses money. Or says the Gemara, the Mishnah, another opinion is that the money goes to the owner, which makes more sense. Okay, the Gemara says, right, because the renter isn't responsible for natural death. Again, we said each shomer has a different level of responsibility. The renter is not responsible if the animal dies of natural causes. So he acquires the right of the cow when it died, and therefore he swears that he doesn't owe the original owner any money. But the borrower who borrowed it from the renter now needs to pay him. Let's say a person rented a cow and then the original owner borrowed it back during the time when he was renting it. And even if they do that a few times, it's going to end up that the owner and then the animal dies while it's by the owner. it's going to end up that the owner is going to owe the renter the money for the cow. Because again, because he rented it and then he borrowed it from him, the borrower always has to pay the renter. The renter doesn't have to pay the original owner. So he's going to end up having to owe him a cow or two even by the end of this interaction. So be very careful when you borrow things and rent things, because it's important to know what you are responsible for. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. We have a little bit of time, so if people want to ask questions, I'm happy to answer questions. In the meantime, wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov. Next week is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, so Chodesh Tov, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.